Welcome, everybody. We're just giving it a moment to allow a couple other people to log on.
Okay, everything's running and ready whenever you are.
Okay. Well, good morning. I'm Suzanne Kavik. I'm president of the League of Women Voters of Newcastle, and it's the League's pleasure to welcome you to this forum on the town's budget. The League is a grassroots organization that promotes the active and informed participation of all citizens in government, and voter education has been one of the League's most important functions. The town budget will be presented by Rob Deary, our town comptroller. Town Administrator Jill Shapiro and Town Supervisor Ivy Poole are here to answer questions. I ask that you hold all of your questions till the end. You can either type them into the chat, which will be monitored by one of our Newcastle League board members, Alexandra Holt, or you can raise your hand and Carrie will let you in and ask the question verbally. We are also recording to YouTube, so you'll be able to watch this again at your convenience. So please just hold your questions till after the presentation. I'd like to turn this over right now to our town supervisor, Ivy Poole.
Thanks, Suzanne, and thank you to everyone at the League of Women Voters for giving us this opportunity to share with you our proposed budget for the town of Newcastle for 2021. So this year, the Newcastle Town Board instituted quarterly budget updates from Town Controller Rob Deary. This was a new practice that we started this year, actually prior to the pandemic, because this board decided that we wanted to stay on top of our financials throughout the year. And of course, now in the midst of the pandemic, there's been much to discuss here in 2020. With the guidance and the leadership that we've had from Town Controller Rob Deary and Town Administrator Jill Shapiro, the town board has been deeply engaged in continually reviewing the town budget throughout the year to determine how our revenues and expenditures were impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. The town entered the pandemic, I should say, in a fortunate position relative to other municipalities, and our finances have remained strong throughout. We have a healthy fund balance and cash in the bank, and we knew from the outset, we were confident that we had enough cash on hand to be able to meet all of our obligations this year. That said, we acted swiftly to identify those variable sources of revenue that would be impacted by the economic downturn caused by COVID, such as sales tax, mortgage tax, summer camps, parking permits, building permits, and tax penalties, to name a few. We also examined our expenditures and identified potential areas for reductions should further belt tightening be necessary due to the economic downturn. So this included things like road paving and camps and recreation programs, which I'm proud to say that we were ultimately able to maintain for this year. All along, the town was really mindful that we wanted to be able to maintain top-notch, high-quality municipal services while dramatically reducing discretionary spending and trimming every possible ounce of fat from the 2020 budget. So how did we do it? So starting out in March of this year, while other municipalities were really kind of still coming to terms with the fact that they needed to shut down their operations and figure out how to work remotely, Newcastle was able to pretty swiftly adjust to this new normal. And we passed a series of emergency financial measures in 2020 to address the impact of COVID-19. We established purchasing limits. We limited overtime for municipal staff. We established a hiring freeze for new positions, and we also extended the parking permits. So we adjusted that calendar year several times actually, and now we'll start it off in December of 2020, which provided some temporary relief to residents and delayed the start date in response to the work from home orders. So as a result of these and other proactive measures, I'm proud to say that the town of Newcastle, while we've undoubtedly felt the effects of the economic slowdown, COVID was not catastrophic for our budget and operations here. Back in April, based on the revenue and expense information that we had available at that time, the town was projecting a net loss of $1.6 million in 2020. but through a combination of higher than anticipated revenue sources, such as sales and mortgage tax, which never slipped to the extent that we had anticipated that they would, as well as some townwide cost saving measures. By September of this year, the town was able to reduce that projected net loss to only $840,000 only. Throughout the year, the town board and our professional town hall staff, led by Controller Rob Deary and Town Administrator Jill Shapiro, have continued to consider this crisis from all angles, developing different scenarios and projections, and working to create a plan for the future, the budget for 2021, that is modest, conservative, and focused on continuing to provide the highest quality essential town services. Our 2021 sort of public budget process kicked off in October. When the town board, Jill and Rob, met with all of the department heads to review the tentative budget for 2021. So with an appreciation for the ongoing financial impacts of COVID-19 on Newcastle residents, the town board provided the following direction regarding the 2021 budget. The town must continue to provide excellent municipal services without increasing taxes. And despite the unique challenges that were presented by the pandemic, I'm pleased to report that the proposed budget includes a 0% increase in the tax levy. This is truly an incredible feat, and I cannot say enough about the work that Rob and Jill and the department heads did to accomplish this goal. It wasn't easy, but it was the right thing to do, and they got it done. And I'm going to let Rob walk you through the details, but suffice to say that the town needed to employ a series of what I call pandemic cost-saving measures to improve efficiencies, and Jill Shapiro more simply and honestly calls difficult decisions. So I'll let Rob walk you through all of that, but we understand that our forecasted revenues for 2021 are not going to rebound to the 2019 levels. We know that. There are contractual and obligated expenses that will increase in 2021, such as employee benefits and retirement, as well as contractual expenses, and we cannot avoid those. So to accomplish our goals, what did we do? The following. First, the 2021 budget, which you'll hear about, reduces staffing by 4 positions. We're not laying off staff. We've avoided that. All 4 positions are either currently vacant or will become vacant during the course of 2021 and will not be backfilled. The second thing that we've done is that we've allocated a total of $1.2 million from fund balance for the 2021 budget. Of this total, $500,000 was already in the financial plan to be transferred from fund balance to offset the debt due to recent borrowing, specifically for the downtown Chappaqua infrastructure and streetscape project. However, this year we've allocated another $700,000 from our fund balance specifically to offset the anticipated revenue losses in 2021 that can be directly attributed to COVID-19. So there are cost-saving measures that are embedded in every department, and Rob will go into greater detail about those in just a moment. I will say this in closing. This is my first budget as town supervisor, and like everything else this year, it's been a trial by fire. Preparing the town budget during the COVID-19 pandemic has been an enormous challenge. It's difficult to predict. It's a complex puzzle that we've been trying to solve, but I truly believe that this budget successfully controls discretionary spending and offsets and accommodates uncertain revenue streams. Our budget is conservative and it is careful, and we are fulfilling the promise that we made to residents at the outset of the pandemic to keep the tax levy flat. So I want to say thank you to Rob and to Jill for your steady hands and your experience guiding our finances during these challenging times. The town of Newcastle and our residents are lucky to have you guiding the ship through these waters. And I'm personally indebted to both of you for your friendship, your support, and your good humor, in addition to your vast knowledge and expertise. So with all of that said, it is my pleasure to introduce our town controller, Rob Deary, to present the 2021 proposed budget. Thanks.
Hi, thank you, Ivy, and thank you to the League for having me. I can't remember how many years we've been doing this, but it's been quite a few, and it always gives me a good opportunity to present this ahead of time to the town, to the League, And it's kind of my dress rehearsal for the public hearing that will be on December 1st, the Tuesday following Thanksgiving. So I will just touch on a little bit. This presentation has to do with the 2021 budget, but we can't really get there until we understand what was happening in 2020. Ivy is correct. And from I always take a conservative to almost a pessimistic view of our finances. So when I'm presenting, I kind of really like to look at what's the worst case scenario. And when we did talk in April, we were very fearful with an economic shutdown, what sales tax was going to look like. The projections from the county weren't looking great. The housing market kind of came to an abrupt halt back then. And we were uncertain whether we would sell parking permits this year, whether we would be able to run any recreational programs, all that were significant sources of income for the town. And Ivy mentioned we instituted quite a few cost-saving measures, and those had the desired effect. I'm happy to say, and I'm going to update the board and the town this evening. I'm going to give a new update. What we said in September was about $800,000 or $840,000. I'm happy to say the numbers appear to be trending even better than that at this point. Sales tax numbers through 3 quarters, and we've received 3 of the 4 payments, look on track to actually reach or exceed our budgetary goal for 2020. Mortgage tax, I do have the exact numbers, though we haven't received the payment yet. That comes in about 3 or 4 weeks, but those look to exceed budget by a couple $100,000 actually. I think everybody in town knows we kind of had maybe an exodus from the city or some of the more populated areas, and Newcastle is a very desirable location. And I think the real estate agents would tell us that, title companies would tell us that, the amount of final water readings told me that, and then finally mortgage tax is going to bear that out. So I'll give some exact numbers later on this evening, but we're definitely trending in the right direction. With that being said, the pandemic is far from over at this point, unfortunately. So we did have to make some difficult decisions for the 2021 budget. And in particular, we had revenue sources that we're just not able to bank on like we have been able to in the past. And in particular, parking revenue from the train station parking lot. A source of revenue, typically about $1.15 million. Where we're going to end up in 2021, we would hope that residents are able to begin going back to work and commuting to the city. What that exactly looks like, I think the world has found out that we can, and we've been having meetings via Zoom and WebEx and other types of platforms like that. So I'm not sure we'll ever get back to a full parking lot like we had. From a revenue standpoint, I hope we do. But we've got a few other revenue sources that we've projected and we've altered. So as Ivy mentioned, we are planning to take an additional $700,000 in fund balance. We do have that. The fund balance is typically called our rainy day fund. And I believe at this point it's raining. So we're going to take a little bit of that fund balance. I will show you later in the presentation where I expect that to leave us on a multi-year plan, and we're still in good shape. So Carrie, I'm going to try to share my screen right now and see how this works. And let me try share my screen first. If this doesn't happen to work. And can we see it?
Yes, we can.
Okay. All right. So just to walk a little bit through the budget timeline, this year was just like any other. It's a fairly lengthy process. We start in mid-July where we meet with the department heads. We ask them for their recommendations at that time. They get 3 years worth of prior year projections, and they get to take a look and forecast what they project that they're going to spend in the coming year. Later in August, once everybody's done with their vacations and we're getting back to school, that's the time when we meet with department heads, with Town Administrator Jill Shapiro and myself, and we kind of fine tune the request from each department head. Early in October, that's when the budget is presented for the first time to the town board, and they have an opportunity to meet with each department head, and they're able to justify their budget requests. It's then up to the town board to make any final changes. I will tell you this year there weren't any from the tentative budget. I think we were kind of lean to begin with, and the board appreciated our efforts. So there really weren't any changes from the tentative to what then became the preliminary budget, which is what we'll talk about today. The public hearing then is December 1st, and it is expected to be approved then the following Tuesday on December 8th. Just going over a little bit of the tax cap information. I won't read the whole thing, but I think we're all pretty familiar with it. We're in the 10th year of the tax cap, and unfortunately I never have been able to do a budget without the tax cap. This year though, the tax cap really wasn't the issue. We had plenty of money with under the tax cap, but our issue was to try to bring in a budget that was cognizant of financial situations of our residents and try to bring them, maintain our services at the lowest possible tax hit to them. Somebody's obviously not watching me, and they're calling me on the phone. So I'll just go over how we do calculate the tax cap, and typically that number is 2%. The lesser of 2% of the rate of inflation. For the first time in a couple years, the rate of inflation was actually below 2%. So we had 1.56% this year. Also factored into that is what they call the tax-based growth factor. It measures growth in the tax base and the assessable value in the town. Again, this year was a touch under what we had in the prior year. It was 1.0079. When you add all this together, we could have actually increased the tax levy by $859,000. What the actual levy increase ended up being was $93,000. And I know Ivy said it was zero. I'll get to explain why zero is 93 in the next slide. If you look at the top line, the general and highway funds, that was zero. The actual levy is for 2021 is what the levy was in 2020, no increase. Where the increase came was special districts, and we had some special districts, OVAC and our ALS service, as well as our Northern Fire Protection District had some increases there. Northern Fire Protection went up rather markedly last year as Mount Kisco had some renovations they're doing to their firehouses. And since we share the costs, we had to increase our taxes. We increased it one amount last year, but we were able to offset that with a little bit of fund balance that we had. Unfortunately, we don't have that option again this year, so that's where you're seeing a little bit of the increase in the Northern Fire Protection District. So going through the calculation, we just take the entire tax levy for 2020, which was about $22,023,000. You add the tax-based growth factor and then the tax cap numbers. And then we were able to carry over monies that weren't used from the prior year. So that was about $339,000 last year that we were under the cap. It gives us our total limit of $22,883,000. And you see our tentative, actually should be preliminary total at $22,117,000. So we're about $766,000 under the cap. Okay, just showing a historical look at our tax levy over the years, and you see in 10 years, this tax levy increase, again, the total tax levy increase, 0.42%. That ranks as the second lowest that we've had in the last 10 years. This slide just shows our budget summary. Across the left are all the different funds, the general and highway. Those are the portion of the budget that pertains to every single taxpayer. Underneath those are all the different special districts. Water and refuse apply to most taxpayers in the town. And then depending on where you live and what your services are, you may be in any of these other special districts, sewer districts, or smaller water districts, sidewalk districts, commercial refuse. So the total appropriation, which means the total amount of our budget altogether, is a little over $43,097,000. The next column shows of that 43 million, how we're funding it. 18,328,000 is coming from various sources of revenue. In the water district, that could be sales of water. In the general and highway fund, talk about sales, mortgage tax, summer camp revenue, CHIPS funding, various sources of revenue throughout the different funds. The next couple of columns are going to be the fund balance used for operating and fund balance used for capital and debt. I know Ivy talked about 1.2 million. I'm showing another 150,000 in the general fund. That's because that money was earmarked for debt. So we didn't include that. That was not included in our 1.2 calculation. Those come from premiums when we issue a bond. We get premium money typically in return that has to be used only for the debt. So that's what that extra 150,000 comes from. Then the final column is the amount raised by tax, and that's the total tax levy broken out by fund. Just to go over a few of the finer points, budget summary for 2021. In spite of the difficult year that we're having, we still we recognize that our infrastructure and maintaining our road paving budget is a very important thing. So once again, we've maintained that at 1.125 million. Beginning about, I guess it was about 7, 8 years ago when Rob Greenstein was elected, that became a priority. And now with Ivy, she's maintained that. We, over the years, ratcheted that up. We had years that we didn't pave any road, years we paved a couple 100,000, and we're now up to 1.125 million. So that's both Ivy and the town board's commitment to maintaining our infrastructure. The budget also maintains funds for the town board and the advisory board, the beautification advisory board. Their allocation remains at 25,000. They do a lot of work in the downtown beautification. They do the flower baskets in the summer. You will see the holiday lighting and the garland that'll be about to be put up, and some of the other plantings around town. The town boards and commissions, we've had a couple different commissions kind of join us this year, so we've actually increased that number. It went from 5,000 up to about 15,000. We do have the Holocaust Committee, I think, has requested some funds in there, and the CRE now. So we wanted to give the board a little flexibility to fund some of the projects for some of these other boards and commissions. And we have also maintained the town board special projects at $25,000. The town, over the last probably 5 or 6 years, has used that for some of their special, I don't know if I want to say promotions, but when we talked about, I guess it is some of the promotional materials that we've had for the Hands on the Wheel campaign and the No Knock and the dogs. Sorry, can't remember the name of the campaign, but with the dogs being locked in the cars. So the town board special projects, we've funded some of those promotional campaigns through this line. Each year we have a vehicle replacement schedule. This year we are going to replace 2 police vehicles. That's actually down from 3 that we had originally, that were originally requested by the police. They took a second look at their schedule and realized they could make do with 2 police vehicles. So that's what's been included. Ivy talked about the reduction of 4 full-time positions. When we were here a year ago and our finances looked great and 2020 looked promising, we actually added a police officer and we actually added a caretaker position to the budget. So really what happened in 2021, the realization that we probably won't have the revenue sources that we did. We've just taken those 2 positions out. So we're really restoring the police officers back to the level of 2019, and we lose that caretaker position. The recreation supervisor too, That work will be spread out within the recreation department, and as will the work of the DPW laborer that we expect to lose through attrition. I will mention the total workforce for the town is 115 full-time positions to a tune of about $11,076,000. So, yes, we've had to reduce some positions, but we think with the 115 full-time staff, the town will still be able to provide all the services that our residents desire. Just showing a breakdown of all the different funds, how the $43 million is spread out. You see the vast majority of it, almost 2/3, is coming from the town general and highway fund. And the water fund makes up probably the next biggest piece of the pie. I'll go over the key revenue sources for 2021 and what we expect the change to be from prior year. So the biggest non-tax revenue source for the town comes from the county sales tax. As I mentioned, we expect to see $3.3 million this year in 2020, and we are hoping to see $3.3 million in 2021. In 2019, when Westchester County added a 1% increase in the local sales tax, they had some numbers they projected for us. We, again, were very conservative there, and while the county thought we would expect to see a certain number, we went with a little bit less. Obviously, nobody could have foreseen the pandemic, but as we typically budget, and my philosophy in particular is it's very difficult to make up revenue sources, and we're seeing that this year. So, and if we miss on that number by 100 or 200,000, it's very difficult to make that up on the other side. But we are optimistic that county sales tax will remain at 3.3. We hope that 2020 is the worst of it from a financial standpoint, and we hope that we see this number in 2021. State aid mortgage tax, again, another difficult number to predict. 925 is what we had budgeted in 2020. We're going to far exceed that. Again, I'm going to be conservative and just keep that at 925. We don't really have any way of knowing if, I don't know if I would say the exodus, but the move from the city and the more densely populated cities into our town will continue. So we're going to leave that at 925. If we do see better numbers there, that will mean a reduction of the 700,000 in fund balance we'll need to balance the budget. Commuter parking fees, that line alone typically accounts for $950,000 in a normal year. We've reduced that to about 500,000. Again, that revenue source, we have changed the cycle to December. So we actually have a full year for things to get back on track in order for us to realize that 500,000. And we are hopeful that we'll see that in 2021. Building permits, we reduced that number just slightly. 950 was the number for 2020. And while our building department is extremely busy and going strong, we think we're going to fall a little bit short of that 950 this year. So we're just going to be a little conservative and drop that to 900,000. The concession income, this comes from primarily from our franchise fees from Altice and from Verizon. We typically get about 100,000 a quarter for each of those. And also factored into that number is the train station, the rent from the restaurant at the train station, some other smaller sources, the cell tower as well over in Millwood. So we expect to have about 480,000 there. It's a slight increase of $5,000. And last biggest source from the general fund is summer camps. We reduced that number. We were able to run summer camps this year, obviously not to the capacity that we had hoped, but we are hopeful that we can get back up to normal by next summer. The one thing that I will say with summer camps and some of the recreational programs is that while we have a loss on the revenue side, the camps are a pretty expensive operation to put on. So if you lose the revenue, you also lose the expenditure side. So it's not as though losing any money in the summer camps is actually a net loss of that revenue, because we're not spending the money. And in particular, the travel camps, those are quite expensive when they're going to baseball games or they're going to water parks or those types of things. So there's a significant expense that's tied to the revenue as well. In the highway fund, really only one large source of revenue other than tax funds, and that's our state aid, the CHIPS money. We expect that money to be unchanged at $225,000. The water fund, obviously the source of revenue is from water sales. We're projecting a little bit lower, combined about 176,000 lower in water sales, and that just comes because water sales are cyclical. They're tied very heavily to the weather. This summer, as I think a lot of residents have seen, their water bills, I know we've had some calls, and I know that Ivy has shared in her newsletters and some of her announcements that water bills are significantly higher, and that's because we've had an extremely dry summer. Anybody with irrigation has had to use that to keep the lawns looking green. And this summer was a little bit different with the pandemic as well, because I think people were home as opposed to taking vacations that they had. And typically, I know myself, I had my college student at home for a little more time than I would have expected. So I had 5 kids at home, and the shower and the washing machine running constantly. So fortunately, I'm on a well, so that didn't hit me in the pocketbook, at least not in the water aspect. But because we've seen a year that was significantly higher water usage than normal, we're going to drop that projection down a little bit for next year, and thinking maybe it'll be a little bit wetter. Again, that's nothing we could know. We're not meteorologists, but it's just a projection that we're making. And then the other large fund, the refuse fund, we see our revenues declining a little bit there. Compost and mulch sales, we continue to project that downward. We have had to slow down the usage of our horizontal grinder, and we're only taking we're taking a lot smaller amount of product in, and in turn we have much less to sell. And the compost and mulch and the yard waste are tied together. Just showing another pie chart of the breakdown of all the revenues. You see of the total $43 million in revenue, about 51%, a little over half, comes from property taxes. Water sales account for a significant portion, 17%, and departmental income, that would be things like summer camp revenue and town clerk fees, building department fees, those types of things. And you see county sales tax is about 8% of our total budget. On to the expenditure side, I'll talk about some of the expenditures that affect multiple funds, in particular employee benefits. We have had some very good news along the health insurance front. In spite of the COVID pandemic, or possibly because of it, our insurance plan is showing a significant surplus for this year. And we've been able to maintain our rates. We have 2 different plans for the town, one that covers the vast majority of employees and the other that covers about 15 to 20. So the MVP plan went up slightly. The MEPCO plan didn't go up at all, and the combined increase on $4.9 million was only about $57,000. So that's very, very good, much better than the industry standard. Unfortunately, we're not seeing such great results in the retirement contributions. We're projecting a significant increase, about $285,000. And that number, they look at typically a rolling 5-year average. And unfortunately, when they factored in the projection for this coming year, they took the snapshot on March 31st. And on March 31st, the market was really at about the bottom of where it is for the year. market has since rebounded, but their projection and their snapshot at that time for the investments for the retirement fund were much lower. So that's why these are the projections that have come out from New York State, and we're looking at about $285,000 increase there. Workers' comp, we're actually projecting a slight decrease again. The town, I think it was 6 or 7 years ago, Jill, we changed workers' comp carriers, and we actually changed our focus as a management team here to prevent injuries at work. And we've done a really amazing job. I will tell you, the year that we changed, we were quoted about 900,000 as the renewal, and our cost that year ended up being about 550,000, and we've actually brought that number down almost every single year since then, and we look for that to trend downward. What I also didn't factor, that's not factored into this, is we also now, because our results have been so good, we are entered into what's called a safety group, and we actually receive dividends back for our for the performance versus the plan. And I think this year was about $64,000 back into the plan. So the town continues to make really great strides with our workers' comp. Our total debt service for 2021, that goes down a little bit each year as we pay down some of the principal. The interest payments go down a little bit. So total debt payments, a little over $3 million, and that is down $73,000 from last year. I will mention also the town is in the process of refinancing 2 of our prior bonds. Interest rates are really at about an all-time low right now, especially for municipal bonds. So the town is in the process of refinancing I think 2009 and 2013 bond issuances, and we're looking at a savings of probably about $40,000 a year over the next 11 to 12 years. The last one on this slide are our legal expenses. Keenan Bean has agreed to keep the retainer flat, I believe, again this year, and the hourly rate flat again. And we've actually reduced the budget for this just based on prior years. The past 3 years, we've been under budget each year. So we just kind of looked historically and dropped that number. I will mention that the town typically, and for 2021, carries a contingency line. That number's been about 150,000. It's remained that for most years. And we kind of have that in there in case we do incur any kind of significant legal expense or significant unforeseen expenditure anywhere else. Moving on to the other funds, the highway fund, as I mentioned before, road paving and permanent improvements stay at $1.1 million. That's unchanged. Also unchanged is our projection for snow removal expenses, salt, and the salaries, is the overtime that the employees receive. Salt, we're keeping at $295,000, and the salaries at $195,000. I will say that, knock on wood, we had a very easy beginning of the year. January, February, March were much lighter than prior years. So we are hoping to see a surplus in 2020 for both salt purchases and overtime salaries. And we've left the brush and tree work at $175,000. We've seen recently, in fact, just this weekend and over the summer, we've had a couple significant storms come through town, which results in a lot of brush and trees that need to be removed. So this number in prior years, several prior years, had been below 100,000, and just we had noticed, I think 2 years ago, we changed that to 175. That it just wasn't cutting it. We just had we had a lot more storms than we had in the past come through town. The water fund, the cost of raw water that we need to pay New York City, both for the town share and the Pleasantville share, that's going to be about 1.4 million. Related to the revenue side, where we projected lighter revenue, we're projecting lesser expenses as we're not purchasing as much water on the expense side. The water plant operations, that is the independent contractor, Suez, that runs our water treatment plant, little under $1.1 million, and also a significant expense source are the electricity to run the backup pumps and the water treatment plant. I will note that the Croton backup, the expense forecast for next year is combined about $85,000 less. We had projections as we have needed to use the backup. We weren't sure how much we were going to have to use it. So in prior years, we had budgeted more money. In 2019, we actually got a look at how much that was actually going to cost, and we were able to reduce the budget by that amount this year. And then just looking at the costs in the refuse fund, 2021 represents the last year of our contract with SantaPro. So the contractual cost of them is $1.175 million. We will be going out to bid sometime probably in the late spring or early summer for future years. Unfortunately, we do look at that number to probably increase beyond 2021 due to the global markets for both refuse removal and recycling. And our transfer site charges almost unchanged, about $1,700 less. That's the cost. The collection is what SantaPro costs to pick it up, and the transfer site charges are what we have to pay to dump it. Another pie chart just showing where all the expenses are going. You see the personnel costs. I mentioned before, the 11 million plus was salaries. When you factor in overtime and part-time employees and seasonal employees, that total number for personnel costs is a little over $13 million. You see employee benefits, about $9 million, about 21%. And contractual costs are the biggest chunk at about a little over a third, almost $16 million. So this just breaks down the costs of an average resident. I picked an average resident with an assessed value of about $170,000. I'm just going to use a standard number. In years past, I flipped back and forth and tried to pick the average. In some years, it goes up 1,000, some years down 1,000. It's typically right around 170,000 of assessed value. So if you had that average house, your general and highway fund taxes for the year would be $2,680. This just gives you a chart of how that actually breaks down. You see your police services and employee benefits are the two biggest portions that contribute to your tax dollars. Police service, $640, employee benefits about $647. You see snow removal, about $53 per residence. I think that's a pretty great number. Our guys are out there all night, and I know the roads are typically cleared pretty fast, much faster than where I live. I have to tell you, when I have to commute, once I hit the town of Newcastle, it's usually clear sailing for me. So they do a great job, and I think $53 a year is a bargain. Just to go over the capital projects, and that's our debt service. About $200 of your tax dollars go towards those capital projects. Okay, just looking at how the tax rate changes. So we talked before, Ivy talked, and I mentioned that the tax levy for general highway doesn't change. But what happens if you look at the top line and the total assessed value, we've actually lost about $4 million in total assessed value. So when you're comparing apples to apples with a house that was $170,000 in each year, you see based on the equalization rate, that changes. It makes the market value vary just slightly, but if you look at the tax rate information across the middle, so what you're looking at now is essentially you have the same amount of tax levy, but you're dividing it across a smaller amount of assessed value. And that's why you see the tax rate actually increases 1.72%, even though the levy itself did not change. as I mentioned earlier, the tax cap numbers and the tax rate growth factor, you see those have both declined from 2020. And the total tax levy, including all the special districts, is up 0.42%. Next, I just have some charts that kind of show graphically your tax dollar information. In this one, I'm just showing what your total tax bill might be. So the town does collect the taxes for the school district and the county. So you are writing a big check to the town, but how much the town actually keeps in comparison, not a whole heck of a lot. So if you look at the dark purple shaded in the bottom, that's Chappaqua Central School District. The pink shading on top is the Westchester County. And then you get the green is the town of Newcastle and the special districts. So the vast majority of your tax dollars are going to school district. Again, my dollar bill shows CCSD in the library. So almost 74 cents out of every dollar of your total tax bill is going to the school district. The town keeps about $10 of that. The county gets a little over $10 of that. And then special districts and fire protection, a smaller amount. Okay, we mentioned the fire protection district, and I just called this out. I mentioned at the beginning that we had the Northern Fire Protection and why we saw an increase there. And we do include in the budget book information for the Newcastle Firewood District and the Millwood Fire District. Those are not part of the town's budget. They don't apply to our tax cap. They don't apply to our levy. While we do collect the taxes, we turn over the full amount to both fire districts. That's not the case for the Northern Fire Protection District. That is a special district of the does affect both our budget and our tax levy. And just to show you a comparison of the three different sources of fire protection in the town, you see Millwood Fire District is the highest. I think everybody knows they completed their renovations a couple years ago, and what you're seeing is probably the effects of their debt service in paying off those renovations. Northern Fire Protection is right in the middle, again, as a result of the renovations that Mount Kisco is doing, and the lowest are Newcastle at the moment. Just a 10-year projected debt service schedule. And when we talked about allocating fund balance, we have allocated fund balance through 2023 to help pay for the debt. The reason that is because, as you see, from 2023 to 2024, we have a significant drop in the debt service, and it actually goes to, I use 2017 as a kind of a baseline for debt service, and we used fund balance to kind of cover anything that went over that baseline. And then once we get to 2024, we're below that, and future years, it continues to drop off. And the last couple of slides just show our fund balance and just speak to the financial stability of the town. You see kind of the magenta shaded bar, that is the general fund balance. You see we actually had some lean years back in 2011, 2012. At that time, they were allocating significant portions of fund balance to balance the operating budget. We kind of changed that, and it's not a philosophy that we follow anymore. We're using it in 2021 because, as we mentioned, we're expecting to use part of our rainy day fund. You look in 2013 to 2019, we were able to build on that fund balance. Part of that was to offset the debt that we knew that was coming. And a lot of that was through some, I think, our conservative budgeting on the revenue side and our control of expenditures. And this is where we project to be through 2023 with our fund balance. You see the general fund. I use 19 as a baseline. That's the last year that I have an actual. 2020 and 2021, those are projected. Number one, we do project that we're going to use some fund balance to balance 2020. And then we have the budgetary appropriations in 2021. But you see that we still, even at the end of this projection, we still look to have about almost $5.5 million in fund balance through 2023. And that keeps us at about 23 or 24% of our budget. Really, we would prefer not to go below 15%. So even after the difficult year in 2020, the allocation of fund balance in 2021, and allocations through 2023, we still look to be well above that baseline at the end of this projection. Okay, so that's all I have from my slideshow, and I can answer any questions that anybody might have.
If anybody would like to ask a question, you can type it into chat or you can raise your digital hand and we'll open up your phone line.
Okay, I see a few comments, so let's see. What is the most important takeaway for community members from the proposed budget? So I think the most important takeaway is that the town is going to be able to weather the pandemic and continue to provide the services that the residents need. We're maintaining a workforce of 115 employees, 37 police officers. We've got a full DPW staff, a full town hall staff. You know, while nobody likes to lose those positions, again, they come through attrition. We have not had to put anyone out of a job, and we still expect to provide all the services that residents have grown accustomed to. So I think that's the most important thing. And the town remains stable, as you could see through the fund balance projections through the years. You know, we still look to have a significant amount of savings in the bank and the ability to weather any financial, hopefully not, but any financial downturns in the coming years.
Rob, you've got another question. Do you see that one?
Yep, I see from Lee about the golf course tax certiorari claims and the potential impact. So we did include that in the budget for this year. So we typically have a budget of $100,000 for tax certs. I will tell you that in 2020, we're only at about $1,700 right now. So you know, that's always a difficult number to project. In the last 10 years, I think we've had $100,000 in each year. 2 years, we exceeded that $100,000. 1 year was Riverwoods, and 1 year was SG Chappaqua. But if you take those 10 years and average everything out, we've been well below the budget. So based on my conversation with Josh Herman, or the town's assessor, we thought it was prudent to increase that number by 50,000. So that will be able to be absorbed within the budget, and we don't expect to go over in that line. So I see another question with the refuse contract renewal in 2022. Is there an estimate of how much you think it could increase, and would we use fund balance to make up for that increase? So I don't have an estimate right now. We've talked with Mike Sicali from the Refuse and Recycling Department. We know that the global markets have changed significantly from 7 years ago when we last negotiated this contract. We kind of renegotiated a slight increase about 2 years ago. And I don't think we know exactly where that's going to go right now. We do expect a significant increase. Our fund balance in the refuse fund is about $2.2 million, I believe. So that will be an option and a discussion for the board next year. I will mention that the current fee for refuse collection that's paid via your taxes, but it's $440 a year per parcel. That hasn't gone up, I think, in 8 years. So we may have to look at that next year. It might be a combination of fund balance, and it might be a combination of increasing that fee. But I think we've done a good job of maintaining that at $440 for 8 years, and actually maintaining our fund balance as well.
You know, the other thing is that it is possible that we might be able to get an indication from other municipalities who have to resolve contracts in 2021. So maybe we'll get some insight into what 2022 might look like for us. But it's just such an open area, and boy, it's going to be interesting to see where that ends up, unfortunately.
Are there any more questions for anyone? Well, it looks like we're all set. Thank you guys both so much for doing this. And as Carrie said before, this is recorded on YouTube, so we will be posting that on our League of Women Voters page for anybody who missed out on this and wants to watch again. But thank you all so much for taking the time to do this.
Great job, Rob.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
And thanks to the League of Women Voters for hosting us. It's really a tremendous opportunity for us to be able to present this to the community in advance of the public hearing and the vote coming up in December. So thank you all.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we're done.
Okay.
All right.